So we're going to go right down the line. Laurence Msall, you know who he is, Civic Federation. Laurence, raise your hand. Greg Hinz, who used to write about the Near North Side and still writes about the Near North Side, from Cranes, Greg Hinz.
Yep, that's right.
Well, last time I made a joke, and I have someone here who wants me to make no jokes. So this is not, for all you baby boomers, this is not Fabian forte. Let it go. Let it go. I'll be a tiger about it. Nothing. Tom, I'm telling you, we got to get yeah. All right, Matt Fabian, who knocked it dead last, is a consultant, works for, who you work for, man?
The Municipal Market Analytics.
Yes, Matt Fabian, big round of applause. And coming back again, batting cleanup, Carole Brown. And Carole, why don't you announce your full title?
CFO.
Of?
The City of Chicago.
Yes, and you think your job has pressure. Give her a round of applause. Okay, we're going to go 3 to 5 minutes, roughly speaking, starting off with Laurence Msall, and then we'll have a little interchange between them. And if you have questions for any of the panelists, not for the moderator, write them down, and our people, if we still have them out there, will come in and pick them up and bring them up here. So, Laurence, you're up.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks to the City Club for inviting me to be a part of this panel. You know, as we were preparing for lunch today, Ellen Alberding mentioned, you know, Laurence, people seem pretty much in a good mood. They're, you know, whether it's the post-Labor Day spinoff, but the direness of what you talk about and the financial condition of the city hasn't seemed to put people's moods in the wrong place. And I think that's good. I think it's good that, you know, that we can come together at the City Club and talk about what are really some very grim financial situations facing our local governments. I think one of the problems that we've had in Chicago for some time is not dealing directly with the financial elephant in our living room. I was here, and Matt Fabian and I were here in last May, just after Moody's had downgraded the city's credit rating to below investment grade status. That was a really unfeasible to many of us 5-10 years ago to ever think that the city of Chicago, as robust of a economy, as beautiful a city as we have, that people would view it as junk. And we've had more of that news since then. The Chicago Public Schools, as many of you are aware, are now rated as junk by all the major credit rating agencies. The Chicago Park District was part of that sweeping downgrade at Moody's, remains in that same position. Sadly, we're now into the 4th month of the state's fiscal year, and we're operating without a state budget. And while there, you know, people appear to be in relatively good moods down in Springfield, they go see the butter cow and the other things that you can do down there in August, and continue to talk about the fact that they don't have a budget, but it hasn't led to, unfortunately for the city, for all of us who rely on a functioning government at the state and local level, it hasn't resulted in a coming together of the state legislature and the administration as to what the state's fiscal budget will be for the coming year, or for the year that we're already in. You know, the issue that Fran broke related to the $500 million property tax increase, and the Tribune has been reporting on it as well, would be the largest property tax increase in modern history for the city of Chicago, but it's not the full answer, and it's not going to be enough if that is what the mayor presents a week from Tuesday. I guess the 22nd is when his budget address is going to be, because we've dug the hole so deeply. And that's all of our responsibility, right? We can look to our city council, which did or did not act in a way to protect the cities financially. We could look to our legislature, which created much of the pension statutes that allow for benefits greater than we can afford, that allow for statutory underfunding. But I think we have to look at all of ourselves as Chicagoans that let this condition get to such a horrible place. And now the answers are not politically attractive. They are not politically easy. That's why the stalemate is continuing in Springfield, because not enough members of the Illinois General Assembly, those who want to close a $4 to $5 billion deficit, know what they need to do in terms of revenue, but they can't find the political mechanism to bring enough strength to bear on that. For Mayor Emanuel, in 2 weeks, he is going to have to play the most delicate of balancing. Even if you put aside, which we do as a nonpartisan organization at the Civic Federation, what the campaign or reelection realities are, you put that all aside. How is Mayor Emanuel going to convince the City Council and the citizens of Chicago that with this very painful and we believe necessary increase, most likely in property taxes and perhaps in garbage collection fees and any other sources of revenue that can be identified, that the city will stabilize, it will stop the bad practice of borrowing for operating expense, stop using scoop and toss, which pushes the cost of not even this government, but the previous government, onto our children and our grandchildren. So it is a very important point in the city's history, in the city's financial history certainly, and we'll be looking forward to see what Mayor Emanuel comes forward with to convince all of us the benefit of doing the very difficult but necessary tasks that we've avoided for too long.
Round of applause. All we can. Well done. Greg, you're up.
We don't have too much time today, so I'm going to go right for the jugular here.
Why should this day be different than any other day? Go ahead.
Thank you,
sorry.
Paul.
Sorry. Wrong season. Wrong holiday. Sorry.
I think what we all really want to know is how the hell would we get here? Who wears the jacket? The quintessential Chicago question. And Laurence is right that to some degree we all do. Everybody who watches, follows, profits from city government. But like most problems, this one goes right to the top, to whoever is in the mayor's office, to a 30 or 40-year series of miscalculations and wrong moves and whatever. Rich Daley's been out of office now for better than 4 years, and I don't want to pick on the guy. He did wonderful things to reposition the city economically. We have an urban core that is the envy of the country right now, and he's largely responsible for that. But one of the things he didn't do is put money into pensions. I don't know the last time that the city of Chicago put aside into its pensions what it actually was required to. It's been decades ago. When he left, we had a huge market downturn, a terrible recession that made the problem worse. But when Rahm Emanuel says that he inherited this problem, Rahm Emanuel is right. All these funds, I can recall reading reports from Laurence Msall 5-10 years ago about how the police and fire funds were on the road to bankruptcy, and they weren't too many years away. None of this is new. Okay, so here comes into office Rahm Emanuel, and he says he's going to do something about it. And he has, but he made a couple of, I think, pretty fundamental errors in hindsight. Hindsight is wonderful. One of them was legal, and one of them was political. The legal one is Rahm Emanuel bet the farm that he could negotiate a deal with the labor unions in which they would agree to concessions that would cost the city less. And he made the calculation that in the meantime, we won't put up their money until they put up theirs. That would be bad bargaining. So we won't put in any more than we were putting in before, which is only a small fraction, like a quarter, if that, of what we were supposed to be putting in. And he bet that the courts would say that's okay. Well, he actually got away with the first one. We all forget here, it hasn't received much attention. The Chicago Park District pension plan was refinanced a couple of years ago. Nobody challenged it in court. It was one of those negotiated deals in which labor takes somewhat less and taxpayers put in more, but it passed muster. But this year, in the wake of what the Illinois Supreme Court did with state pension funds, that strategy is kaput. There's still appeals pending. But nobody thinks that the deal he cut for the police and laborers, the municipal and laborers funds is going to hold up on appeal. And he didn't even try with the police and fire department. The deal they cut was we'll just take a little longer to give you the money, but we'll still give you every penny, which means we're going to end up owing more because it takes more. So there was a legal miscalculation. The political miscalculation was presuming that his buddy and fellow master of the universe, as it were, Bruce Rauner, is somebody he could work with. Wrong. Springfield is a mess. I'm not sure the mayor totally appreciated that Mike Madigan, the Speaker of the House, would take this whole position as a life and death struggle and offer absolutely nothing. So here's the mayor. He's got all kinds of things that could help. A casino that could pay part of the bill, another measure that's gotten through the Senate already by a veto-proof majority to extend the payment period for police and fire. That bill hasn't even been called in the House at the city's request because either they're afraid that Mike Madigan won't let it pass, or they're afraid that if they do, Rauner's going to veto it because he wants some anti-union provisions added onto it. Either way, you got a mayor now who's hand in hand, who kind of has an ally in John Cullerton, has a Mike Madigan who's going the other way, and is he going to get anything ever? Who the heck knows? I mean, we're in completely nouveau territory here. The one to watch is Chicago Public Schools. I mean, at least this mayor finally apparently is going to bite the bullet and call for a lot of new taxes to pay for pensions at the city level. CPS has got a $500 million hole in its budget. And what are they going to do if they don't get it? Well, they don't know. And the school year has started. The kids are back, which means that if something doesn't happen in Springfield, there's going to be an awful lot of layoffs not too far down the road. So here's the mayor's property tax increase. I agree with Laurence that it is probably inevitable. One of the other mistakes that's been made through the years is nobody wanted to increase property taxes, so Chicago rates are, if you own a house, are way below what they pay out in the suburbs, and we're gonna partially get rid of that, maybe totally. Watch for some kind of mechanism in what the mayor proposes to try to alleviate some of the pain from homeowners, particularly low-end homeowners. Don't know the exact form yet, but they're certainly looking at it. But the bottom line here is the day of reckoning has finally arrived. The people, with all of us watching, who run this city, made some bad calculations. Now we got to pay for it.
Okay, round of applause for Matt, you're up.
Thanks. Can I start with some good news? I mean, I'm a bond guy. And
There's more cannoli.
I mean, normally bond guys don't lead with good news, but at least for the city of Chicago, right? Last week when the property tax increase was announced, there was actually some positive movement in Chicago's bonds for the first time in quite a while, where there was a fair bit of trading, up a point or two, which isn't a whole lot for your average bond, but it's at least something, right? And so. The municipal bond market with respect to Chicago, the Illinois bond market generally, is just starved for good news. So this is something, right, that you could take, but at least there's a recognition on the market's part that there's an affirmation that there's something happening. And I think that point is very carefully made. The sense, I can say, out there among the analysts. My firm, what we do is we provide research to municipal market participants, so people who buy and sell the bonds. And the sense in the market, generally, is still extremely cautious about the city. And I think that, looking forward to, regardless of how we got here, where we are, there's concern about the future. Ultimately, pension liabilities, right, they accrue a cost of living adjustment every year, and they go up. To the extent the economy doesn't grow at the same rate or faster, right, the city and any government will continue to fall behind unless it increases how much it pays. So it highlights part of the risk that Chicago still has, right? There are certainly steps being taken that are in the right, I mean, not all steps are in the right direction, but a lot of them have been. But the risk, from my perspective, is that if we have another economic setback, right? If there is a recession that's either local or national, if there are other risks that come in, the mayor's plan, as I understand it, is based on the idea of things, that costs and gimmicks, et cetera, will be worked out, within a period of time, 3 to 4 years, but that leaves very little margin for error in case things go wrong, potentially terribly wrong, as they did in the last recession. So there's some need for urgency, I think, from our market's perspective. And, and when I was here in May with Laurence, we talked a bit about the city needing to come together, the city needing to talk about things, and then, like Laurence pointed out, move beyond just talking and actually begin to do things. And I think the city, to its credit, has been doing so, but we need much more, and there needs to be, I think that, resting on the city's laurels is not yet appropriate, and that there is still a fair bit of work to be done.
Okay, round of applause for Matt, especially because he had some good news. Carole, you're up.
I'm up. I wrote down, Greg Hinz said, Rahm Emanuel is right. So I want that to be.
There you go. Job security.
Give the extended version when you repeat that, would you?
But in all seriousness, first, thank you very much for having me here today. And as I was listening to the remarks of my colleagues, I realized that maybe it was not a good idea to go last because you stole a lot of my thunder. But what I will say is that the city has been very much focused, since I joined, which was in May, we've been very much focused on this year's budget and very much focused on the difficult decisions that the mayor will have to make and that the mayor will announce on September 22nd. I will say that the mayor has not announced his plan yet, and the story that ran in the Sun-Times, although it portended a property tax increase as well as some other revenue raises, we continue to work on the budget, and the mayor hasn't announced the plan yet. But I do think that we were all encouraged by just that press report, that the impact that had with our investors and with people who are watching the city. And I think it underscored for us the importance of getting it right, and getting it right for the investor community, and getting it right for our taxpayers, and getting it right for our residents. And so we're going to do that. And the mayor had always and continues to say it will be reform before revenue. And so we have cut every year since he's taken office the cost of city government, and we continue to do that. This year, he has already announced $170 million of cuts around this budget, and we will continue to have reform before revenue. But we understand that some of the legacy financial practices that we've inherited came at a cost, and the cost that Laurence and Greg have outlined. And so we're addressing that now, and we're ending the practice of scoop and toss. We're going to eliminate the structural deficit in the next 3 years. And the mayor has always said that he will not use property tax to balance the operating budget. Understand that we look at our operating budget differently, I think, than some people do, meaning that we don't include the cost of our pensions in our operating budget. And so if he were to pursue a property tax increase, the mayor would only use that for the police and fire pensions. And I think that's important because we understand the importance of achieving a structural balance and paying for government and paying for the services that we offer our taxpayers. We understand that we have to do that on an ongoing basis, and we can't do that on the backs of our taxpayers. We also understand that any tax increase would have to be progressive and it would have to be fair, and that we would not ask those who can least afford to bear the cost of a potential property tax increase. And so those are all things that we're grappling with, and all things that the mayor will announce when he does his budget address on the 22nd. But I will say, while it is important to understand why and how the city got here, it's less important than to understand what the city is intent on doing and committed to doing to make sure that we continue the positives that make this a place that we all want to live, right? So the city is, for the second year in a row, the largest city for corporate relocations. We continue to invest in our neighborhoods. We can continue to encourage businesses to invest in our neighborhoods. How many people have enjoyed the lakefront and enjoyed everything that we're doing? The mayor opened Northerly Island Park this weekend. I mean, so there are all these positives that we want to continue to build upon and make this a place that you want to live and that your kids want to live and your kids want to raise families. And so we're balancing the challenge of this financial situation that we're in with the challenge of continuing to invest and to build the city that makes us so special. So with that.
Okay. If you have questions, raise your hand and our people will pick them up. By the way, is any truth to the rumor that the mayor is reading now the biography of Harry Houdini and Nicholas Wallenda? I thought that was a winner. Okay, any comment from anybody about what anybody else said except the moderator? Greg, you want to?
I would just add that Rahm Emanuel is famous for having said that you never let a good crisis go to waste. Yes, there have been some cuts in the city budget, and they continue to roll out some more. They're all kind of fairly small, although they add up, and they affect different things. But I will be disappointed if this budget just proposes the world's biggest property tax increase and doesn't use the occasion to really cut some big programs, because the city now has a long record of spending more than it takes in. I don't claim to know what they are, but one thing that's certainly been kicked around through the years is we have half as many fires as we used to, but we have the same number of firehouses. Do we have to collect garbage every 7 days? What about every 8 days? I don't know what they are, but I'm going to be disappointed if the entire burden here to speak of comes on the revenue side and we don't get into the expenditure side.
So the part where I said that reform before revenue, and the fact that the mayor has cut our structural deficit by more than half since he's been in office, all of that leads to the fact that we have at City Hall now probably 1,800 fewer employees than when he took office. I mean, all of that shows evidence that he is committed to making sure that we are running a government that is more efficient and more cost effective.
Well, I hear you, and there have been some cuts, and this isn't the occasion to go into it in detail, but if you want to look at a government that's really cut its staff, take a look at the Cook County Treasurer's Office. She probably has cut her staff, Maria Pappas, 75%. Now her operation is particularly computer linked, and she can cut in ways that you can't. But anybody who shuffles paper at City Hall, and there's still a lot of paper shufflers, there's lots of ways to make it more efficient, because it's happening in the private sector. It needs to happen in the public sector too.
Greg, how can you compare the job and duties of the mayor to the job and duties of the county treasurer? That just seems unfair.
You can't in its entirety, Paul, but some of the things that happen at City Hall are the same kinds of things that happen in the treasurer's office. They collect money. They issue bills. They keep track of expenditures.
All right.
I think one of the things, and I think it's not so much a comparison, is just the understanding of modernization. We're slow to modernize in the city of Chicago, certainly in the county, and even in the state of Illinois. But I think the lesson, when you look at how did we get here, it was from not focusing on the important and long-term implications. When someone stands up in the city council and wants a pat on the back because they didn't raise your property taxes at the same time they were borrowing for the operating budget, at the same time they were using, gimmicks and other things, they're not deserving of as much applause as they have in mind. What we are now faced with in Chicago is that we are going to have to raise taxes very significantly just to pay the interest on the debt that we have built up. And it's not going to be enough to save the city of Chicago. To Greg's point, it can't just be a big revenue answer. It can't just be the largest property tax increase. It has to be an effort, and the mayor deserves some credit, and Carole points out, he's driven some efficiencies, some reductions in spending, but it's not enough. More needs to be done. The public is not convinced that we've wrung the inefficiencies out of our local government. We can't have 6,998 units of government in Illinois and think we're doing it as efficiently as you would want. We have a big problem, and one of the biggest problems is not the tax increase. but it's the reaction to the tax increase. If businesses and people do not think that there's hope at the end of the tunnel, that this thing is going to work, that we're going to stabilize our government, that we've done enough, that we're going to change our bad practices, they will leave, and they will not be the answer to our problems.
And I agree that, again, I'll say it again, and reform before revenue, but let's not conflate that there's 6,000 units of government that are paid for out of the city budget. They're not. And I agree that government can always be more efficient. But by conflating those two things, you imply that the mayor hasn't made tremendous effort to cut the cost of his government. But at the same time, we will continue to invest in our neighborhoods. We will continue to invest in this city. We will continue to make it a city that people want to live and work in, and we have to balance the cost of doing that
Right.
with
So when we talk about the
the
number
cost of government.
and the layers of government, we look at the number of pension funds. Why does Chicago have its own pension funds? Why does the rest of the state participate in the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund? Why do we basically maintain that? It's not Mayor Emanuel's fault that we have this history, but he has to be part of the answer as to how we go forward to consolidate.
Listen-
And in the defense that that's not going to generate enough savings isn't compelling when you add it all up is how we go forward.
Listen, we were in the press a lot earlier in the year, calling for, and I don't want this to debase into a CPS discussion, but calling for pension parity at CPS. And we say that it's unconscionable that as a City of Chicago resident, you pay taxes through your property taxes for contributions to the teachers' pension, Chicago Teachers Pension Fund. Part of your income tax also goes to fund teachers' pensions in the rest of the state. So I agree with you. There are corrections that need to be made in Springfield for parity's sake and for efficiency's sake. But the impact on the city budget this year is not 6,000 units of government.
Absolutely correct. I mean, what's showing enormous restraint, the moderator is not going to say anything on that other than we're part of the state of Illinois, and a lot of things that are being said are controlled by Springfield. Municipal governments are the stepchild of the state government.
Well,
They can't even get a budget passed. How are you going to redo the property tax?
Paul, let me put it a different way. When this mayor has made certain cuts that were probably necessary, he's gotten all kinds of grief from it. Remember closing the health centers a while back, 4 years ago, and all the storm that created, even though it's really silly for the city of Chicago to run health clinics when you've got a Cook County that runs health clinics. Huge storm about it. The storm over closing public schools. It was not handled well. People weren't brought into the process. But when you have a system with declining enrollment, you don't need as much brick and mortar. It's just a fact. I hope the message that's gotten through to the mayor from those experiences is not, you don't do those things. I hope the message that's gotten through is we have a crisis. I'm going to really ask taxpayers to pay whatever it is in property taxes, plus a garbage pickup fee, plus a lot of other stuff. So this gives me some political cover to make some cuts that normally I wouldn't want to make. That's what I'm asking.
I think
Matt, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, I think that part of what makes a good and strong financial profile, right? It's not just being resilient in your ability to sort of absorb shocks, but it's also in being predictable. And part of what where the city has been. I'm sorry, I've totally lost my thought here.
Matt, if you were being paid by the hour, we would be taking a discount now. Come on.
Anyway,
Step it up.
sorry. So I think that basically that investors are, looking for this. It's not just financial, but also political stability. And so what Greg points out, really is a concern. To the extent, the market doesn't just want higher taxes and lower spending. It wants a politically sustainable and stable government, so that there aren't, so that volatility in management doesn't just arise, and so that volatility in policy doesn't arise. So how you get there, how you get to that level is through transparency. And part of one of the good things about Chicago's finances is that the property taxes go to things like the pensions, so that when the mayor raises the property tax, it's not just going to something amorphous, it's going to an actual cost that people can see, and then people can think about and maybe stew over that their hard-earned money is now going to pay pensions, and maybe that leads to either more support for pensions, because yes, I am happy to pay that, I think it's worthwhile, or it leads to the discussion of, we need to think more about, what we do with our pensions. And that transparency leads to, in theory, a better debate, and then a more stable system overall, which is really what anyone is asking for.
Okay, let's get to the questions, because we have some real good ones showing total bias. First question is from Charlie Gardner, who just happens to be a trustee of Roosevelt University. Amazing coincidence. Jay, we have to turn the air conditioning up a little in this room. Here we go. Please reconcile two assertions. The tax increase will result in $500 more on a $250,000 home and will be a 60% increase. True or false?
True. True, if that's the figure. The reason for the discrepancy.
Greg knows. No, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. She's working the books. Go give it to her.
The reason for the apparent discrepancy is that only when you get your property tax bill, only about 21% of it is attributed to the city of Chicago. Better than half of your property tax bill goes right to Chicago Public Schools. So the city of Chicago can raise its figure 60%, but that's only a fifth of the bill overall.
Carole, you?
No, that's fine.
All right. We have Judge Bertina Lumpkin. Where are you, Your Honor? Lampkin. I'm sorry.
I'm getting content.
I know who you are. I know you. I know. My error. A little nervous up here. How can we educate the public at large about the need for tax increases, etc., to make sure that the police and firemen have a pension?
I think that's what we've all been trying to talk about and explain to people how we got here, which is Greg's point, and how we got here was that the city underfunded its pensions for a number of years, and the law that was passed in 2010 that kind of hot-wired the contributions so that we would be at 90% funded in 40 years is kind of what precipitated the discussion, because the increased contributions start in 2015. So I think that we have tried to explain to people kind of the challenges that face the city, which are included the required pension contribution, as well as the structural deficit, as well as ending some unsustainable financial practices, as well as depositing and starting to build up our rainy day funds. And we just will continue to try and do that so people understand the importance of the city meeting all of its obligations, and that's what we're committed to doing.
Part of the problem is that although I tried to put the jacket squarely on the mayors, the responsibility for where we are is much more diffuse than that. Two things are simultaneously true. We didn't put into pensions the amount of money we should have put into pensions, and the pension benefits are too rich, and we as a people are being asked to do too much. If you're
they're really too rich for the level of revenue being put against them, right? That's
too rich relative to what taxpayers have to deal with in their life. Most people most people now, if they get a pension at all, they don't get it until 66 or 67. If you're, I don't take anything away from the difficulty of being a fireman or a cop. They're miserable, awful jobs, but those guys can walk out of the job at 56 or 57 with the full ride. In the other two funds, municipal and laborers, and in the teachers' funds, they get a 3% a year increase, even though cost of living compounded, even though cost of living is only going up 1%. So there's too much that's unfairly going out at one end. At the same time, the city hasn't put in what it relatively should have put in. It all leads to the problem. It's why it's really difficult for a taxpayer to figure out, well, who do I shoot?
Easy.
Everybody.
Yeah, Laurence, help me out here.
You make a very, very good point, which is that responsibility is not the same as accountability. And how do you hold them accountable for what they've done? And the Illinois legislature created all the pension funds, even the city of Chicago's, and put into statute the historic underfunding, and basically set aside, added benefits at the same time we were underfunding. And the danger is, if you pay attention to only one thing, right, whether it's the 3% compounded automatic increase or it's the level, it's not enough. You have to look at broadly what is the overall impact. And our benefits, the 3% compounded, which it's important to point out two things, because I think, one, the public employees did nothing wrong. All of those government people went and did their jobs and basically did what they were told. They had no control over what the benefits are. And now many of them are drawing the benefits they were entitled to. Our elected officials, especially our state representatives down in Springfield, did not pay attention to what the cost of the benefits that they were adding to, and they never held themselves or anyone else accountable. So now we're in this horrible position. We call it, we are in the worst possible scenario in Chicago. We have a dysfunctional state government that doesn't want to help the city of Chicago easily. That doesn't mean they won't, but we have to figure out a way as part of the education for all those elected members of the General Assembly to say, if the city of Chicago or the Chicago Public Schools, and that's the unit of government we are most frightened for at the Civic Federation, the Chicago Public Schools, to pass a budget with a $500 million hope that Springfield is going to provide $500 million in pension or some other relief, and then start spending as if that relief was already here, makes us very nervous, makes us wonder what happens if there's any hiccup economically, the state, how the Chicago Public Schools will go on. And so,
and the problem with that too, even worse, is that it does undermine the idea of a transparency, right? Because you're not paying for the full cost of what you are of what you're providing. I mean, I take issue, I think, because I don't say I take issue, but I don't think it's up to any individual, right, to determine what a pension level should be. I think that it's up to the city to think about, and this is where the idea of transparency comes in. What exactly are you paying, and is that too much?
But it's statutory. It's statutory. So the city doesn't set the contribution amounts. Sure. It's statutorily set. The benefits are guaranteed, as we've seen with recent court cases.
If you learn nothing else in Illinois, we do something different than people that have well-funded pensions.
Yeah,
that basically can afford their defined benefit plan.
The city does. Believe me, if the city had that kind of control over the pension funds and what the contribution levels, both employer and employee, we might be sitting and telling a different story. It's statutorily set.
Well, I got to comment on that. Yes, it's technically statutorily set, but most of those statutes were passed as part of political deals. There was an understanding that over a period of time, well, we're going to get this in pay raises, but we're not going to get as much on the pay raise, so we'll get a little more on the pension. Occasionally, Springfield would go out of its way to pass something that the city of Chicago vigorously opposed. But as a general rule, when pension legislation passes in Springfield, it is effectively by consent of all the parties.
By definition, that's statutorily set, right?
Goes back to the 1970 Constitution about impaired and can't be impaired or diminished. And ladies and gentlemen, that wasn't even an issue back then. I've interviewed those people, and no one even there were other things that were more important. Part of the reason is, and County Board President Preckwinkle mentioned this, and she was absolutely right, people are being paid so little, so it's compounded. Who cares? The base is so small. Times have changed. Very much so, but it goes back to the 1970 Constitution, and that was a state constitution. Remember, a lot of these are great ideas, but there's two problems. One, we're part of the state of Illinois. Two, keep that in mind. We're now, and our population has diminished, so now we only vote 20% of the vote. We used in the 1950, we've almost 50% of the vote. So we are the junior partners, not only in the state, we're the junior partners in the region. Number two, politicians, especially in this state, have never been known to be martyrs. So a lot of the stuff sounds great. Who cares? We got the teachers screaming because you closed 50 underused schools. Greg, I want you on the front line when you close firehouses and you deal with those firemen. I just want you to stand up there and say it's just a matter of policy and see what happens. Enough of me. Ed Bachrach, Center for Pension Integrity. Not an oxymoron, eh? The underfunding of pensions increased $4.3 billion. How can $450 million begin to solve the problem? Laurence, this is right up your alley.
Right, and Ed deserves some recognition for his work with the Center for Pension Integrity and trying to bring a greater public awareness as to the challenges and to come up with some ideas for what the solutions could be. The reason why a $450 million is a beginning is because it matches with what the statute actually requires the contribution to be under the existing law. It's not the answer. When we talk unto itself, the problem is you cannot fix a defined benefit plan one day and then think you've got it solved for the next 30 years. You have to look at it every year. That's the problem with having so many pension funds throughout the state of Illinois. Well-funded systems in other states don't have hundreds of funds. They have a singular or maybe two. California, as big as California has consolidated the majority of its pension funds. And that allows you to do two very unpleasant things. One, to match up what the cost of the benefit is that year and what it is to keep it going forward. And two, to hold someone else accountable for making that contribution. Those are the disconnects that we have in Illinois. The state provides benefits, but they don't provide the funding for the city of Chicago to make those contributions. You only have to look back less than a year when Mayor Emanuel came forward with an idea for the Municipal and Laborers Pension Fund that was going to significantly reduce the cost of that pension fund that was negotiated. What was the response in Springfield? Oh my goodness, if we pass this, they're going to raise property taxes and we're going to get the blame. You can't have that kind of disconnect. They are expensive benefits to provide, and they're even more expensive if you don't fund them every year based on actuarial science.
Yeah,
Not a bad answer.
there is.
Okay.
To take off of Lawrence's point, there is one pension fund in the state of Illinois that actually works pretty well. It's the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund. It covers municipalities outside of the city of Chicago. And what they do every year is, unlike what we did in Chicago, unlike what happens with the teachers, at the end of the year, they sit down and they look at, you in effect have a sub-fund within their fund. If you're Arlington Heights or whatever, they take a look at, okay, this is how much you got, this is what your liabilities are, this is what you need, the path you need to be on actuarially to be there in 20 or 25 years. Oh, you're short, you're going to have to pony up another $500,000 to $1 million this year. There is no control mechanism like that, Laurence is right, in Chicago's pension funds. It's all been statutorily set after political deals.
You know, one of the real positives that's come out of the city's downgrade and situations generally are these exact discussions, right? Because it does create transparency around what the pension liability is. Because there is, you know, although actuarial science, right, demands that pensions be fully funded, the problem with a fully funded pension is that they get poached by employees in labor negotiations in the future. So, you know, it's almost, you know, there is a balance in a sense of how well funded you want your pension to be. A comfortably funded pension, which is what Chicago thought it had until, you know, a few years ago, just leads to incremental benefit allocation and underfunding on the revenue side. It's not necessarily the most or the lowest cost per unit of labor that it, you know, that it's ultimately funded by. It's not necessarily the best system. So,
I would just want to point out that. Can I just
Go
say?
ahead, Carole, then I have to
Go ahead, Carole.
Can I just say that the city funds have been getting actuarial reports for years, and so I think it's not true to say that the city thought they had comfortably funded pensions a couple of years ago. I think that everyone acknowledged and saw that because the contributions were statutorily set, that the city was not making actuarially required contributions. And so you could see the funding percentages every time you looked at one of those reports. And so I think it's a misnomer to say that the downgrade made the city wake up and see that they had underfunded pensions. I don't think that is accurate.
I also have to weigh in, Matt. Your idea that 100% funded pension isn't the cheapest way to fund a pension, it is the cheapest way for the taxpayers, right? Because that's how these systems were built. Basically, that if you have 100% funding, you generate the interest from your investments, and that makes it much less of a cost. The fact that politicians or others want to basically, who have less financial sophistication, that's what it really is about. When you have elected officials who don't understand compound interest, basically, that make decisions that say, well, we can go on a holiday as long as it stays 90%, and not think that that's going to have a tremendous cost to us.
If it's a closed system, right? If it's a closed pension system, then 100% is reasonable. I just seeing how, I mean, these gaps have emerged, specifically because too many benefits have been allocated because there was the perception that funding was adequate.
But we don't
there
have
was
a
no
closed
actuary
system.
that would have told you to add benefits to any of the city pension funds in the last decade when they were under 80% funded or 70% funded, that they were adequately funded. The information was all there. There were commissions 5-10 years ago that basically pointed out these things were going to run out of money. And yet every year in Springfield, there is a bill that provides new benefits, new changes to the law. That's not how you run a fully an effective defined benefit plan. You don't throw it into the legislature and say, well, we might do an actuarial study, or we did one 3 years ago, so we think we can we're going to move this bill now. That's where Illinois really is disconnected from financial reality compared to other well-funded states' pension systems.
All right, we have one more question, and but so much, not really exciting stuff, isn't it? 10 years ago, we would not have had this discussion. Of course, we probably would have been in better financial shape, Laurence, right? Here we go. This is from Tom Donovan. This is a yes or, oh, no, multiple choice answer. That goes for you, Greg. Multiple choice answer from Tom Donovan. Will these taxes and tax increases be remembered as A, daily taxes, or B, annual taxes? Always leave the sandbag for last. Laurence, you've been riding high today. What do you think? Daily or annual?
I think most citizens will recognize that both, right? Part of, Mayor Emanuel's been in office 5 years. He's going to basically see that, the citizens are going to see that he has tried to do things. He has done a lot of good things to try to end some of the bad practices. But what he's found out is what the Civic Federation told everybody that was running for mayor 5 years ago, that we're in bad financial shape and it's going to be very difficult. Now the question is not who's going to get the blame, but what is the public's reaction going to be? Is it going to be one that we're going to stabilize our government financially so businesses will continue to come here, or is it one that's going to scare people away?
All right, Msall passes. Hinz.
B, it should be partially A. What this decision, if it happens, tells me is that the odds that this mayor is not going to run for mayor again have risen considerably, that he's decided this is legacy time. It's time to clean up the city and the mess, and if he has to pay the political costs, so be it.
Yeah.
Oh, I take B, but I think that B is a positive. I mean, it is actually trying to right the city's financial ship. So I think that it's B, and people should want to be part of the solution.
Carole, we know your answer, but just say it.
I, for the second time today, agree with Greg. I think it's about the mayor deciding to make the hard decisions and do the right thing and right the financial ship and clean up some of the legacy liabilities that he inherited.
Before we give our last round of applause to all these wonderful speakers, just imagine you go back 6 months ago to a mayoral election when promises were being made about all the wonderful things that our city was going to do, and we have no money. Politics and reality often never meet. How about a big round of applause for our people?